Commencing countdown.
3, 2, 1.
This is the contracting experience, connecting government contracting professionals to the world around them through conversations with acquisition influencers, insights into evolving hot topics, and sharing lessons learned from the field.
In this episode, we sit down with Chief of the Contracting Business Systems Division under the Office of the Deputy Assistant Secretary Contracting, Mr. Jay Olson. Mr. Olson talks about the transition from Air Force contract writing system ConWrite to ConIT. This episode gives important information to all members of the acquisition team on what they should expect in preparation for and transition to the new ConIT system. Mr. Olson also introduces the ConWrite Transition Plan, which can be found by Air Force acquisition professionals on the Air Force Contracting Central homepage. Welcome, Jay Olson, to the podcast.
Hi, great to be here. Thanks, Amber, for having me. Very much looking forward to this conversation.
For sure. So, Jay, in October, Department of the Air Force Contracting came out with the ConWrite to ConIT Transition Plan. Can you tell listeners why the plan was created and what type of information is outlined in the plan?
Yeah, about 2.5, 3 years ago, I started to recognize that we have a very big change management effort ahead of us here, not just with SPS, which is what we were working at the time to get those users into ConIT, but we have a similar problem with ConWrite and later with ACPS to follow. So I went about starting to write a plan to be able to corral the efforts of a few thousand people. We have somewhere in the neighborhood of about 3,000 folks in Air Force contracting and Space Force contracting that use ConWrite. And so we know that the problem is complex. So in order to align the efforts of many folks, I wanted to put together a document. And it's no accident now that I'm here at AQCI that this is the very first thing that I wanted to put out there to the field, in that we're setting a priority to be able to take care of the systems community by getting them into ConIT while concurrently keeping ConIT operational and keeping it at a very high level of performance for the folks who are already using ConIT. And so this plan was really intended to set some direction, set a North Star, and even provide quite a bit of detail for the things that are to come. It doesn't give every bit of information in terms of step by step. We'll have other documents that support this plan and provide more tactical guidance, but we wanted to give the roadmap at maybe not a 50,000 foot view, but maybe a 30,000 foot view of all the things that need to take place and the process itself to make it happen, to align the efforts of all those folks and to actually do the mechanical work to get the transition to be successful.
I mean, like you talked about change management, like it's nice, I think, especially for people on the workforce, to see that there has been some thought put into this, you know?
Yeah. In fact, so this isn't our first rodeo with trying to sunset ConWrite. As you may know, we've been working at this problem for the greater part of, my entire career and greater part of the last 20 years or so. We've had a few false starts and putting ConWrite to bed. And now we are to the point where ConIT is gaining altitude and we are moving out quickly to make this happen, as ConWrite has had a number, and this won't be any surprise to folks who have been using ConWrite, but ConWrite's had a number of problems over the past couple of years. It's a 20th century system operating in a 21st century environment in terms of living on our network, modern network infrastructure. And now we have so many people in the workforce working at home, and they're literally, they couldn't have worked from home until the pandemic started. Now they're literally dialing or remoting into a computer that's off-site somewhere on an Air Force installation, and they're operating ConWrite remotely. And it's suboptimal, but it's something that we've had a few false starts on, that now we're gaining altitude. We've put a lot of thought into this. We've been doing a lot of testing for data migration in the background. AFLCMC has really done a lot of work to set the pace and prep the battleground to make the movement of the data from ConWrite to ConIT possible. And so we're continuing to work through that. And there's so many things that have been going on behind the scenes that we want to start actually communicating those things now, because there really is a sense of urgency to sunset ConWrite, because as I mentioned, it is aging. And there's also a sense of direction in that we know exactly what it's going to take to do this. Now it's a matter of prepping the battlefield and aligning all the cannons and getting everything set to go.
So how should the contracting workforce prepare for the transition to ConIT?
So there are a couple different things and avenues that we're taking to make the transition happen. So maybe I'll start there, and then I can kind of talk about the work that's required to make it happen depending on where they are in the process. So the first thing that we're doing is what we're calling swivel chair. And basically what that means is we are operating both ConWrite and ConIT in parallel. Both systems are being operated at selected offices and locations to make it possible to create brand new contracts in ConIT while working on existing contracts in ConWrite with the goal of closing them out. So the very first thing to do while we're in this swivel chair posture, as I mentioned, is to close out contracts. And we have a lot of contracts to close out. So we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 48,000 contracts total that we see as being eligible to migrate and actually move the contract from ConWrite to ConIT. What we want to do is limit the amount of contracts that we actually have to move, and the way to do that is to close them out. And we have a lot of contracts that are sitting on the shelf collecting dust that have been, in some cases, for decades. And so there's going to be a lot of discussion, and you're going to hear a lot of senior leaders over the course of this year talk about closing contracts out, doing so in a strategic manner such that we are not handling onesie twosies, but we're tackling and doing omnibus settlements, and we're taking advantage of some of the tools that are available to us in DFARS 204, with also just having the Part 42 authorities to us that where we're doing work to close out contracts en masse using quick closeout. And the 17 and 18 NDAAs, they both give us some authorities there. So you're going to hear a lot more about that. And the users should be closing out contracts. That's my first message for swivel chair, and for the second method, which is data migration itself. So at some point here, as we're continuing to test in the background the data migration capability and to develop the tools necessary to move the contract data from ConWrite over to ConIT, some point that capability is going to mature to the point where we're ready to put it out to the field to actually start that process of actually moving that data. As we prep for that, there's certain work that has to be done to contracts to make them eligible to migrate. So we're doing all of this in kind of a concurrent fashion where folks are going to be in the swivel chair posture, learning ConIT, operating it, creating new contracts, but we still have to do something about the old contracts. And some of them obviously aren't going to be able to be closed. We're going to have to bring them into the new system. So certain contract modifications will have to be cut to change various different parts of contracts to make them up to snuff for migration. Because what we're doing with ConWrite data is we're taking something that did not have a particular data standard to follow. The data in some cases is unstructured, meaning that there's a lot of free-form text, and we are putting it into modern day format and protocols and that type of thing, where we are actually now starting to follow some standard ways of collecting data and transmitting that data to our partners. So we have to do some work behind the scenes through our PCOs and buyers to modify contracts to make them eligible. And then we also have some automation that we're working on to try to limit the load of work that will come on to the buyers and PCOs. So this is very similar to what we did with the SPS process. However, the outlook here for ConWrite is that there's a little bit more work to do in this area, just because of the size of the contracts, the age of the contracts, the various non-compliances with modern day standards that we have to actually account for. Not saying that anybody did anything wrong when issuing the contracts. That's not where I'm going. But what I'm saying is we're playing by a different set of rules now than existed 10 years, 15, 20 years ago. And so there was some work to do on that ground. And we're going to provide a set of reports to each location that's operating ConWrite to say, here are the things by contract that you need to work on. So I'm hoping that we can provide some instructions with that, and that we're going to be able to give some direction so that it's not just well, go figure out how to make your contract work.
Right.
We're going to provide some guardrails there.
So what should the workforce expect once transitioned to ConIT?
This is a very interesting question because it really is going to depend on where you sit. So maybe I'll kind of just go through a couple different groups of folks. If you're a buyer or PCO, obviously at the very superficial level, ConIT is going to look different. It doesn't look like ConWrite. It has the modern veneer to it. It's web-based. It has a different set of places to click and to do your work. That's at the very superficial level. But behind the scenes and process-wise, there's some very fundamental things that will change about how we do business. One of them is what we call procure to pay. And ConIT is implementing procure to pay, what we call handshakes. And by that, and if you're not familiar with that, I highly recommend that you go Google procure to pay, because you can find all kinds of good information on this, that DPC's put out various policy memos over the past few years. But basically, one of the key concepts here is that the financial system needs to match the contract writing system, which needs to match the entitlement system. And so by that, ConWrite users are not used to getting a PR, for example, fed in from Deems or FRC or someplace to go automatically into ConWrite. That's something that they tried to tackle years ago. It didn't end up happening, but now it's here with ConIT, where the PRs start at the FM side of the house. They come directly into ConIT automatically. And the key change on this is that when FM puts in a CLIN structure, that CLIN structure in the PR needs to match one for one what's in the contract writing system. So gone are the days of when you'd have maybe the PR would say one CLIN, and then the buyer would take that, interpret it, and spread that one CLIN across 100 different CLINs on the contract itself. The idea here is to be able to have traceability back through all those different systems. And so that's going to be a bit of a change for folks, because if the CLIN, just in this example, is say that you don't have 100 CLINs coming in, but you need 100 CLINs in the contract writing system, contracting is going to have to increase communication with FM to get that rectified. And so every bit of that contract is going to have to match for the data fields that matter. And that will be a culture change. We've seen that with the folks who've already started Swivel Chair, because we have about 450 ConWrite users now using ConIT via Swivel Chair. As of this past FY, we got a bunch of different offices in, about 18 or so different offices in. That's been one of the biggest shocks to the system, is that the PR feeds ConIT. Another thing that at the buyer PCO level that they should expect is the data validation that comes with ConIT. There's something called the Procurement Data Standard, which is the modern day standard that we're following with all of our contract writing. And users of ConIT are going to write their contracts, and they're going to get a validation, just like you did with Check for Errors and ConWrite. But the validation is going to have a lot more checks and a lot more different guardrails on there to say, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. And so there's goodness in that, because it's helping us write better contracts. It reduces the amount of problems that could happen downstream, because what a lot of folks don't realize is that they write their contracts, and then somebody at DCMA or DFAS or somewhere in the business partner value chain has to rectify problems downstream. A lot of those are taken care of upstream through ConIT using the validation service for the Procurement Data Standard. But that's goodness, and it's also badness, because that means that if you're not writing contracts to what the regs require you to do, and and you're not anticipating these different validation checks, and it just takes a few contracts and you get the hang of it. But
Mhm.
at first, it might be a shock system that could slow you down. So
Right.
we're going to have to do a lot of training and work on that to make sure that folks are prepared. So that's at the user level. There's several other things, and we'll work to communicate some of them. But at the management level, we're used to getting very great reports through various different sources, and ConWrite produces wonderful reports to be able to tell you how many contracts X buyer did in such and such period of time and what the dollar values were, et cetera. ConIT, the focus since the beginning has been to develop capability, make it possible to write contracts, and we'll get the data later. So over the past year and a half or so, really starting with COVID, we've done some very great things. My predecessor and others have done some really great things to start building out our business intelligence capabilities, our reporting capabilities, and so we still have some work to do here. But from a managerial perspective, that is something that we'll have to make sure that we're managing expectations on, as there's still development required to make it possible to get all the insights that we want. But that's where we're going. And that's why we're collecting the data using this data standard that I'd mentioned, the procurement data standard. And it's why we are modernizing. Well, at least it's one of the reasons why we're modernizing, is to be able to get insights and make better, faster, cheaper business decisions, that type of thing, to just really inform our business and to build a better feedback loop. And I'm hoping that as we get used to ConIT, that we'll be able to get there. And we're going to be able to do all kinds of other great stuff. In fact, I would recommend that folks go look at the video that SAP AQCI put out earlier this year, detailing what the vision is for Air Force contracting, particularly as it comes to e-business. There's some really great stuff in there about having intelligent document processing, about operating ConIT in a disconnected environment where you can turn off the internet, write your contract, and then once you have the internet again, you can come right back to it. And there's some things out there that are vision-wise, aspirational things that we need to get to. And so I highly recommend that everybody take a look at that if you haven't already. And so what we're doing now is getting the ConWrite users in so that they can play in those games too, and so that they can benefit from the various different things that we're working on to build out a better system that's more sustainable for the 21st century and is going to have the architecture and everything that our users are expecting. A long answer to a short question there, but there's a lot of goodness that will be coming from ConIT. And best of all, it means that people aren't going to have to be using ConWrite anymore.
Right.
And I think that's going to be huge because ConWrite is just buckling under the pressure of everything else that's going on around it.
Right. I think it was a great answer. And I think you addressed, like you said, the different levels of folks that are going to be, taking whatever the system's going to be putting out, whether they're putting inputs in or trying to take what finance is putting in to actually write their contracts, or from a management perspective, looking at the data and how to make decisions based on that. So this is, it's not a easy, there's a lot to this. And so I appreciate you going into it. And I think the transition plan does a great job of addressing some of these things more in depth for folks as well. So I do want to put a plug that you did get put out there on the Air Force Contracting Central, a link to the ConWrite Transition Plan. So I encourage folks to go take a look at that so they can get more information on what is happening currently and what's coming their way. So Jay, what asks do you have for the acquisition community through this transition process?
I would say the very first thing that we need to ask people to do is to be patient and to be flexible. Just like if you're traveling to a foreign country, or any other number of situations in life, you're in the airport and you may experience delays in your flight and that type of thing. I would ask that folks go into this with an open mind, that they work to try to experience ConIT through the ConIT lens. And what I mean by that is, don't go about this of thinking, well, ConWrite did this and ConIT doesn't do that, or this is how it's done in ConWrite, it should be the exact same way in ConIT.
Mm-hmm.
The goal here wasn't just to take ConWrite and copy and paste it into ConIT. What
Right.
we're doing here is we're taking the best of breed across 4 different systems. We've already sunset SPS. We've sunset O-Contracts, which most people probably have never even heard of, but that was used in the contingency environment. So we're taking the best of breed there. We're taking the best of breed with ConWrite, and the same thing with ACPS to follow. And so necessarily by taking 4 systems and putting it into a new system, and by the way, that was baselined off of a different system from DISA, we're trying to bring together a product that that helps contracting officers and buyers be efficient in their jobs and have it be intuitive and have things just be more user friendly and also help people get their jobs done quicker. And that's I would just say that the flexibility is key with this, and just do not just filter everything through the ConWrite strainer, because I think that will make it harder to get used to ConIT. If you can use Facebook, you can use any modern application out there of any sort, you can use ConIT. It's a really easy thing to pick up. It's just a matter of you might have to click in a different place to do something, or you might have a few more options for something that you didn't have in ConWrite, or you'll have to get used to the fact that there's more data collection and less free-form text. And so I would just say flexibility is key.
So I have a hard-hitting follow-up question to that then. So are you telling me there's no like picture of a group of Santas when you're creating a new contract in ConIT?
There's no Santas.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
What am I going to do?
Some of the humor is lost with ConIT, but maybe at the end we can do an ECP of some sort to try to pepper it in. I don't know, but we got to get the capability first.
There you go. Touche. All right, Jay.
Yeah, no sign in.
So what are some of the key takeaways that you want listeners to leave this conversation with?
Okay, so there are system things that need to be done. So let's talk first about the question that I get most often. And I got this in my last job when I was at AFLCMC, in charge of the e-business support office there. And I get this question just about every day now in this job at AQCI, is when is ConIT coming? And my answer to that is that it is dependent on where you are and what you do with your mission and how that matches up with ConIT. So let me give you just a couple examples and some perspective with this. ConIT was developed and baselined on a product that was really suited for operational contracting. It does wonderfully doing purchase orders and fewer CLINs, fewer mods, that type of thing. It doesn't currently handle ELINs. It doesn't currently have UCA capability, and it doesn't have a few things in there that we really need to support systems contracting. So we are doing a lot of development work in the background to make that happen. And so we are fortifying the system by making it be able to handle more CLINs, by making it be able to handle more Acronyms and various different things that are required for handling some of the heavy weight that comes with some of the systems contracts. But we're also working on making sure that some of those specific capabilities required for systems are embedded into the product. So if you work in an office that never does UCAs, your likelihood of using ConIT is sooner than an office that, an FMS office or something that does exclusively UCAs, for example. So that's just one example of many, but what we're trying to do is match offices' capabilities, and we're doing this by DODAC, match capabilities of the system to functional capabilities of the system to the functional capabilities required by that particular office. So that's the first thing for when is ConIT coming. The second piece is what the system itself can handle. So we know that there are technical things behind the scenes in the system within the code that need to be addressed. We know that there are things that have to be done behind the scenes. Moving us into Cloud One, for example, will be important for the scalability of the system. So that we know that there are certain things there that need to be done in order to bring in a huge load of new users doing what they do in ConWrite and beyond ConWrite, ACPS, et cetera, into ConIT. So You may have heard General Holt's podcast earlier this year. I think it was March or April timeframe, where he talked to the number one problem with ConIT was being funding. And we've been working through a lot of the funding issues, but that is a limb fact that we have to handle, because ConIT is just like any other aircraft program, and that there's a lot of interdependencies. There's a lot of predecessor, successor events. There's highly skilled technical people that need to be involved in doing the coding and planning and all the different things. And money is required to make the world go around with this. That is definitely a catalyst and pacing item to make sure that we get folks into ConIT. Then the next piece of this will be for when they go into ConIT, when everybody in the ConWrite world does. And really, you can apply this to ACPS, by the way. It's the same concept, is help desk. So we need to make sure that our support infrastructure is capable of handling the types of issues that are going to be coming in-house to the help desk, and that we have people who are knowledgeable in the subject matter that needs to be done and in the quantity necessary. So that's something that as we go through Swivel Chair, we're constantly assessing not just the system capabilities and the functional capabilities, but also that support structure of, are we right sized for this? Do we have the right expertise for this? And so that is part of the calculus as a pacing item to get folks into ConIT. So there's a lot of variables there, but it's all important in terms of bringing all this together for a cohesive picture. And that's for Swivel Chair, but it's also, I would say, it applies to data migration itself from when we move that data from ConWrite to ConIT. And for data migration, I would add that we need that capability in place. We're writing a brand new utility, just like you have ConAward, and there's various other utilities that most people probably don't even know about that goes along with ConWrite. We're writing a new one called Endgame that'll make it possible to move that data. The data migration effort will be dependent on getting the requirements implemented that LCMC is leading the charge on to make sure that those get implemented into that software package to make it possible. So this year, in FY22, we're going to be working hard to do a number of different things to ConIT to make it possible to handle systems funding dependent. And right now that's looking better. But I want to handle ELINs, I want to handle UCAs, want to handle various different things with funding and making sure that our entitlement systems are hooked up to ConIT properly with MOCAS and various other different things. We have a bunch of different things on our roadmap that are required. And then FY23, if all goes well with 22, and I think that we're being very ambitious with 22, by the way, and some of that might bleed into 23, and that's okay. But in 23, our plan is to start tackling some of the R&D issues with grants and cooperative agreements. And that's a whole different set of effort that we have to start working on, because one of the things that you may know and notice in the plan that we put out here is that we're not covering grants and cooperative agreements in that plan yet. We'll come out with either a new plan or an amendment or some sort of way to communicate what that will be later. I anticipate it'll be very similar, but we've got to do a lot of groundwork still to handle grants and cooperative agreements to really fully get that capability set up in ConIT and make it possible to migrate grants from ConWrite, et cetera. So those are a couple of key takeaways that I want people to know, is that you know, the pace of ConIT coming to you depends on where you sit. It depends on some of these other variables that we're working through in terms of developing the system, developing the migration capability, making sure that we've got the help desk set up. So those are some key things in this plan that I would encourage folks to study. And by the way, the plan, as I mentioned early on, is not the one-stop shop for this transition. There will be other companion documents. We'll have a SharePoint site called the ConMod, Contracting Modernization site, and we're very close to launching the next version of that. That was one of the lessons that we learned through the SPS migration, was that was essential to have, to communicate with folks, to have dashboards to show progress of burning down the issues and burning down closeouts and that type of thing. Got the exact same vision that we're going to do that, and maybe even make it better. I don't know. But the ConMod site will be a place that helps folks stay attuned to what's going on with the transition effort and really stay on top of all the different issues that need to be tackled. And trust me, we're going to have a blitz of all kinds of different comms to make sure that folks are aligned in the right direction and doing the things that we need them to do to make this possible. And if you are an AFRL person or anybody writing grants or cooperative agreements for that matter, or if you're in the ACPS world and you're listening to this, or there is going to be very similar work coming to you as well. When I was talking to the BOD recently, I said one of the things that we cannot do is do this in such a linear fashion where we do systems and we ignore our AFRL grant stuff until later, and then we ignore the ACPS world until the very end. We have to do this in more of an exponential, multi-channel type of fashion where we are concurrently scouting out what are the issues for ACPS, and we're starting to do that. What are the issues for grants? Even if I know that I can't do ACPS next year, which I can't, I'm at least getting attuned to some of those issues so that we don't have a major oversight or something later down the road. And so we want to make sure that some of those things are shovel ready and that we're starting to really get that good big picture. I think that those are really the main takeaways here from this particular document. E-business is changing a lot, and there is so much importance on what we're doing here. ConIT is our weapon system for the Air Force contracting and Space Force contracting communities. And this is very much a program, and it's very much got a lot of complexity to it. But this is what makes contracting hum, and this is how we get contracts out to contractors and get them paid, and all the different things that make our business work. So it's really important that we take care of this and that we get everybody bought in and doing all the different tasks that need to be done, supporting the system properly, making sure that, in my job, making sure that it's funded, that type of thing. We have to get this right. And so I'm really hoping that by releasing this, that we're starting to communicate that, because there are some changes coming, and they are in fact coming this time. I promise that we're going to make it happen.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Jay, I think you said it very well when you called it a weapon system. It's very necessary for our contract writing workforce, as well as our mission partners that rely on the contracts that we write. So I do want to thank you for shedding light on the process and introducing the rollout of the transition plan.
Thank you. I very much appreciate you doing this. This is great. And anytime you want to have me back, if you're willing and able to listen to me, I would love to do so.
We would love to have you back. If you have suggestions for topics or people to interview or feedback on the podcast, you can submit those at thecontractingexperience@gmail.com. I want to thank you all for listening to the Contracting Experience podcast. Until next time, keep connecting to the world around you.